When we last left off in the Digital Devil story, teenagers Nakajima and Yumio had infiltrated Lucifer's Devilopolis, brute forced their way through Hell's most frustrating puzzle to rescue the goddess Izanami, and defeated the Morning Star himself before he would invade the human world. Oh, and Izanagi was there too, in the end spring after contributing absolutely nothing to their efforts. Well done, Izanagi. Time passes, as it often does, and soon we reach the near future year of 1990X. An unknown party decides to nuke Japan, again, but this time the blast opens a rift connected to the demon world, allowing hordes of demons to pour into Tokyo. Fast forward to 2036, Nakajima and Yumio are nowhere to be seen, which is to say, the developers wrote them out of the story so they would have the freedom to tell their own, and they used that freedom to great effect. The original Megami Tensei had a background scenario that gave players an objective to strive towards, but save for a few mandatory events, offered only a blank canvas for us to project our own gameplay experience as the story. Megami Tensei 2, on the other hand, has an actual plotline to follow, and characters have their own motives, beliefs, and agency to pursue personal goals as you move the plot forward. In this video, I'll be going over my experience playing through Digital Devil story Megami Tensei 2. Just like last time, I followed a set of rules meant to emulate the way the developers intended the game to be played. You can refer to the previous video for details, but the gist of it is that I'm forbidden from using emulator features like save states and consulting guides other than the game manual, which also means I had to keep my own maps and notes. As always, I started by quickly going through the fan-translated version of the manual. We'll be taking a better look at specific sections as they become relevant, but first I just want to note how improved it is compared to the first Megami Tenseis. It's both larger and denser, explaining the story and gameplay systems in much more detail and featuring a bunch of beautiful artwork. The table of contents especially foreshadows a very important in-game moment that I just wish I could put up on my wall. Starting up the game, we spot Megami Tensei 2's first major improvement: battery saves. No more painstakingly entering long, nonsensical strings of characters in a bright blue, featureless menu. We now have 2 save slots that we can effortlessly reload at will. Then, another pleasant surprise, we can now name our characters. Megami Tensei 2 is still a Famicom game though, so we're limited to only 8 letters. Sadly, no enchanters allowed. Still, there's an undeniable charm to having NPCs call you by your name. An all too rare occurrence ever since developers decided full voice acting is a vital requirement for any modern game. Stats are largely the same, but the limit was increased from the previous game's 20 to 35, meaning I couldn't just dump all my points on a single stat to max it out from the start. On the other hand, Megami Tensei 2 features temporary and permanent stat bonuses in the form of equipment and instances, meaning I would be wasting points if I did. So for the moment, I decided on a more even distribution, at least until I had a better idea of how common these bonuses were. After doing the same for my partner, the girl character, I was finally ready. Gentlemen, I bid you welcome to Devil Busters. The developers decided to start us inside a game within a game, where our first objective is to make our way down to the Tower of Daedalus and defeat the dreadful Minotaur. Sounds familiar? Of course it does. They even went through the trouble of recreating the town of Mikan exactly as it was in the first game, except using an overhead camera this time. And the music, remastered through the use of the Namco 163 chip, sounds richer, more detailed, and more pleasant to the ears than it did in its original form. It's a very promising start for a sequel, made even better when we talked to the Mionian Elder who, instead of giving us a password, allowed us to leave the in-game game, putting us back in the first-person perspective inside a Hin Shelter number 3, where our protagonist and his friend live a rather luxurious lifestyle for the post-apocalypse. Warm meals, soft beds, and playing computer games anytime they wanted. And this place looks so much better than any environment in the first game, save for maybe Lucifer's palace. Admittedly, it's got a little too much ring going on, but it has an actual ceiling and a floor and much more detailed walls. All that extra detail comes at a rather steep performance cost though, and the Famicom struggles to draw those scenes at an acceptable speed, reflecting the age-old dilemma between graphical quality and responsiveness. That poor responsiveness also carries over to the menus, where the game occasionally fails to register button presses if you try to navigate them too quickly. An ever-present bit of clunkiness that unfortunately marred what would have been an unquestionably superior experience. There wasn't much to explore in the shelter at the moment. I was clearly supposed to defeat the Minotaur first, so I went back to Devil Busters. In there, the gameplay loop was exactly the same as in the first game. Explore the tower, fight random encounters, recruit some demons, then head back to Mikan to fuse, then heal and buy new equipment. The demon recruitment system received a massive overhaul, both in mechanical terms and in how it is presented to the player. For starters, the manual talks openly about information that used to be only vaguely hinted at. While the basic workings are still the same, you now have access to different recruitment approaches: befriending, convincing, threatening, or just straight up bribing your demon friends, and different species react to these in different ways, making the world feel a lot more alive. One interesting detail to note was that my Devil Busters avatar was accompanied by Bael, the partner, while my real-life character was accompanied by the friend Gary. Reaching the Minotaur wasn't too hard, as the top-down view made exploration a lot easier, and he had kindly decided to move his lair from the first floor all the way up to the 5th. My demons and I made short work of him, and just like in the first game, received the Elm Gem for our troubles, which I then attached to an evil goddess statue tucked in a corner on the 6th floor. My screen went white, and for the first time in a Megami Tensei game, the developers award us with a massive lore dump. The demon Pazuzu, freed from the statue, tells us about the end of human civilization in the fires of war 35 years ago, responsible for the great dimensional rift at the heart of the Tokyo ruins. He claims to have arrived in the human world soon after as a messenger from God to guide his chosen ones and save humanity, but before that would happen, ended up imprisoned in that game by the demon Bael. By releasing him, me and Gary proved ourselves to be those chosen ones, destined to save the world, and to help us along the way, Pazuzu grants me the ability to summon demons from a portable computer, including those I had already recruited inside Devil Busters, and to Gary the ability to cast spells. I try to avoid judging people based on their appearance, but a bare-chested fly demon popping out of a computer screen to hand out free spells sounds less like a messenger from God and more like some shady scheme to lure a random passerby into his secret cult so he can feed us to, I don't know, Beelzebub, but never mind that. While we were wasting time playing video games, the shelter was overrun by zombies. Fighting through the undead horde was an interesting experience. While my character had all the levels from fighting inside Devil Busters, Gary was still level 1. This meant I was at the mercy of RNGesus, as even a single hit from a zombie was enough to kill him. Also, unlike in the first Megami Tensei, which shared experience between characters such that they could level up even while dead, Gary did not receive any after dying, causing him to lag even further behind. The shelter's infirmary would happily heal us back to full HP for free as many times as we needed, but they unfortunately didn't have the means to resurrect the dead, so my choice was to either heal myself to get a game over and a full heal for half my money, or keep dragging Gary's corpse around like some sort of Swiss army man. We eventually find the Witch Nebiros, leader of the zombies, and kill him with relative ease. It didn't seem to do any good, however, as the shelter stayed just as full of undead as before. But with this objective complete, it was time to leave our home to its own fate and venture out into the Tokyo wasteland. This leads us to another major addition to Megami Tensei 2, the Overworld map. In retrospect, there is no way they could have gone with the first game's Mega Dungeon approach in a game covering such a significant portion of the Tokyo metropolitan area, so it makes sense that they would fall back to a more traditional presentation, but I really liked the original experience of slowly exploring the same dungeon and becoming more and more familiar with all of its secrets and puzzles, so I felt a little disappointed. Anyway, for the moment, the only possible destination was Haneda to the east, so that's where we headed next, fighting a bunch of orcs and naked women along the way. Which brings us to yet another massive change between Megami Tensei 1 and 2. Modern Megami Tensei games are very famous for their unique designs that range from grotesque to then near pornographic, and this is where it all started. Megami Tensei 2 may not have any genitalia, but boy does it have a bunch of bare breasts on display, and I love it. Not for pervy reasons, mind you. I mean, alright, also for pervy reasons, but let's leave that aside for a moment. Nudity can be a powerful world building tool. There's a lot to say about that subject, but for now I just wanna say the game uses nudity, including male nudity, to great effect as a sign of a demon's bestial nature or their blatant disregard for human customs, for example. I understand a bunch of people feel uncomfortable with that, but for me that's the entire point. We're weak, fragile humans struggling to survive in the rumbling remains of a bombed out Tokyo beset by all sorts of nightmarish supernatural beings. The nonchalant way nudity is interwoven into the character design presents it as just another facet of this brave new world, subtly enhancing the feeling that you're dealing with alien beings in a world gone mad, in a stroke of environmental storytelling that wasn't very common in the NES and faces significant backlash from more mainstream audiences even today. Anyway, after respectively admiring the Harpy's environmental storytelling, we arrive in Haneda and meet another Megami Tensei 2 edition, the Checkmen. These colorful totem heads are both save points and fast travel hubs rolled into one, and the Haneda Checkmen offers convenient access to a healing spring, a heretic's manor, and a steady supply of weak, easy to recruit demons which became a staple of my demon fusing strategy. Seriously, this place was my home base for most of the game. The Checkman tells us how he sent someone to the shelter to deliver us a flame tally. This is an important item needed to get the water demon Mora to ferry us across to the mainland, but before we headed back there, I decided to take a look around in the other building, inhabited by several helpful NPCs whose entire purpose in life is to introduce players to the improvements made to the combat system. In Megami Tensei 2, there's a clear distinction between melee and ranged weapons. Demons, both allies and enemies, can resist and even reflect certain types of damage while being vulnerable to others, and mastering the proper use of guns, swords and the different spell elements makes your life a lot easier. Also, you can finally use your summoned demon spells outside of combat, a lifesaver when your spellcaster is incapacitated. Status effects have a much bigger role, and the developers added a variety of useful items that you can employ both in and out of combat. Enemy groups still consist of a single species at a time though, and you still have no control over who's targeted by your attacks, but the added depth does make combat more fun and strategic, even if still not quite on the same level as their contemporaries. The flip side to these improvements is that you are now forced to use manual commands much more often rather than relying on the auto-attack function. While I certainly appreciate the extra challenge, having to button through all the messages that are normally skipped while auto-attacking slows down the action by a noticeable degree, making the already sluggish experience even slower. We pay a quick visit to Hiroko, Gary's girlfriend, back at the still zombie-infested shelter, who tells us a strange girl showed up earlier with a delivery for us, the flame tally we were looking for, and an autopilot add-on to my character's portable computer. The autopilot is complicated. In theory, it allows you to record a route of up to 500 steps, which my party can then navigate automatically. I never got it to work properly, and it seemed more trouble than it was worth, so I quickly gave up. With the flame tally in hand, the next step was to find Mora at the broken bridge to the north and leave this little island behind. This marks the point where the game finally opens up into a very traditional structure. Technically, you are free to go wherever you want, but the map layout is designed to heavily limit your access to later areas until you have gone through the prerequisite plot-critical events that lead into them. As an old-school JRPG, the UI doesn't guide you to these events, instead requiring you to explore the environment, pay attention to the hints dropped by NPC dialogue, and keep extensive notes. This is great if you like to find things out for yourself, but can also lead to a lot of meandering and frustration when you are unclear on your next objective. Shinagawa was the obvious next destination, but the wasteland is dotted full of places to explore, and one of them happened to be placed squarely on the way there, almost as if the developers wanted me to look inside it first, so of course I did. That later led into a series of linear tunnels and eventually to a Jabberwock, the subject of an amazing movie directed by Terry Gilliam, by the way. Defeating the Jabberwock introduced me to a member of the Messiah Church who recognized us as the Shin Saviors with some highly ambiguous phrasing. From my admittedly still very rough understanding of Japanese, this word here, Shin, can be taken to mean either new or true. Usually, you can tell them apart via context or the different kanji, but this man provides neither. He gives us the Ring of Solomon and vanishes. In Shinagawa, I was introduced to the main game loop. It goes like this. Every new town has a bunch of buildings. One is almost always a dungeon for you to clear, while the others house checkmen, shops, and other facilities, plus some random NPCs ready to offer you story context or useful gameplay tips. Clearing the dungeon awards you plot-related items, allowing you to move on. Every new area brings with it new and stronger demons to fight and recruit, which gives me the perfect opportunity to talk about the fusion mechanics. The first Megami Tensei's fusion system was innovative but shallow. You had a few demons available, leading to many repeated results, and a lot of the demon progression boiled down to just sticking dreads into every other demon you found. In short, the idea was great, but the execution quickly ran out of steam. Megami Tensei 2, on the other hand, benefits from both a much wider pool of demons and a more interesting set of rules, some of which the manual tells you from the start, and a bunch more that you are supposed to figure out via trial and error. There is now an explicit way of progressing along demon tiers. Instead of dryads, failed fusions can result in several different spirits, each attuned to a single demon type, which will always upgrade allies of that type to the next tier. Figuring out reliable ways to acquire each spirit and their affinities made for an interesting puzzle. The more robust fusion system, combined with the stronger focus on type advantages and spellcasting, makes it possible to tailor your team to counter the new challenges you may face along the way, as long as you don't mind grinding and manually keeping track of each demon's abilities, that is, since the demon compendium hasn't been invented yet. Talking to the NPCs in Shinagawa, I learned a bit more about recent events. Supposedly, a witch had taken residence in Tokyo Tower to the north, along with her pet demon Orthros, who had just recently attacked the town and taken the Princess Hotel for himself. Of course, being the protagonist, I just had to check it out. The whole hotel is swarming with monsters, but what I did not expect was seeing just how many NPCs still live there. These people are hardcore. I mean, I know things are bad everywhere, but imagine having to fight 5 random encounters just to get out into the streets. No wonder they have a gun shop right by the entrance. That guy must be earning a fortune. While exploring the hotel, Pazuzu suddenly contacts us to let us know that Orthros is a servant of his and that we should join up. But I thought Orthros was hostile to humans. I'm getting conflicting reports here. Still, that was a helpful hint, and after meeting up with a couple more Messiah cultists, we found Orthros, who seemed eager to leave as soon as possible. Also, he just referred to the witch as Bael. Huh. He's actually pretty strong for the early game, level 18 with a full 120 HP and a focus on vitality and attack power. His only downside is that he guzzles up Magnetite, which, for those unfamiliar with the concept, is a currency needed to maintain your summoned demons, but he more than makes up for it. That reminds me, the way Magnetite works was also overhauled for Megami Tensei 2, or more precisely, added to. While exploring the 3D dungeons drain your reserves just like in the first game, you can freely walk around the overworld without having to worry about your Magnetite consumption, meaning you are unlikely to ever run out, as just traveling between towns is always guaranteed to be a net positive. From Shinagawa, our next major objective was clearly Tokyo Tower, but first I decided to make a small detour for Ariake. Ariake is a bit of an exception to the usual gameplay loop. It's an entertainment town with a bar, several gambling dens, and a charming young lady selling overpriced medicine which paralyzes you. Paralysis in Megami Tensei is actually rather dangerous as it constantly drains your health on top of preventing your actions, and I didn't have the means to heal at the time, so that lady's end actually caused my character to die on the way to the hospital. Congratulations, you just killed the destined savior of all humanity. Hope you're happy, Mayumi-chan, if that's your real name. The people at the bar had a very different opinion about the witch though, talking about how she uses her magic to heal people. The contradictions just kept piling up. Our first visit to Tokyo Tower happened to be unexpectedly short. It's comprised of only a small 5x5 floor, inhabited by a robed old woman who immediately asked whether we belonged to the Church of the Savior. By this point, I had an inkling that saying yes was probably a bad idea, so I said no, and she told me to go on so the princess would heal us. When we entered the witch's chambers, Orthros took the initiative, calling out to Bael and accusing her of being a traitor. A fight seemed about to start, but having every reason to distrust Pazuzu, I tried talking to her, and guess what? She was willing to listen. Diplomacy, banzai! What followed was a kind of conversation minigame where I had to answer her questions with just yes and no's. She talks about how Pazuzu is just spinning up a grandiose tale to fool us into challenging Bael and asks us to abandon him. Saying yes to that causes Gary to intervene, reminding me that we've only come this far due to Pazuzu's help and that we had no reason to trust her. Pazuzu would rot in hell for all I cared. I don't know if he really was written that way or if I'm just too old, but he seemed slimy from the start. I've seen too many stories of young, naive, idealistic people being manipulated into thinking they're going to save the world to fall for that one, but I also didn't want to lose Gary. Unfortunately, my options were very limited, and this being a JRPG, I fully expected this to be a false choice anyway, so I decided to agree with Gary. Bael then immediately flips out and casts a spell that kills everyone in a single hit. I'll admit I wasn't expecting that to happen. Holy hell, even Orthros got vaporized. Aaron's hanging out in the game over screen as always, ready to revive us for exactly half our money. Turns out he doesn't revive demons though, and reviving Orthros can be really expensive this early in the game. It's kinda wild to think the real punishment isn't dying, but rather being bankrupted by the revival fees. Still, it's something I grew to see as an integral part of Megami Tensei's metaphysics. Death is just a setback as long as anyone cares enough to resurrect you, and even Aaron's nonsensical pricing scheme helps elevate the mysterious atmosphere, despite the fact that deep down it's just a gameplay mechanic meant to punish players for failing while allowing a path for us to easily bounce back. I tried talking with the witch again, this time agreeing with her. Gary says something to the effect of "I can't believe you choose the woman," and storms out in a huff, taking the Solomon ring, Orthros, and half my money. Well, I actually expected him to leave the party, but this felt more like a divorce. He even took the family dog. At least I can be thankful that I didn't waste any incense on him. And hey, Bael joins in his place, so it wasn't all bad. Just like my character, she upped her stats from the Devil Buster section, so she wasn't that far behind in terms of levels, but had no starting equipment. The first order of business then was to round up some armor for her. As an aside, if you go back to talk to Gary's girlfriend, she actually recognizes Bael as the strange girl who handed her the flame tally and asks us what happened to Gary. I just love this kind of attention to detail. Pazuzu also takes the opportunity to tell me to abandon the witch and meet him in Shinjuku. Yeah, we're gonna meet him alright. Shinjuku is even further to the north, and the direct way there was once again blocked, but there was plenty to explore around the tower, starting with Roppongi, which just happened to have the first female armor shop of the game. How convenient! Just like the first Megami Tensei, most of the armor and a fair few weapons in this game are locked to one gender, but since there's so much more equipment available, the developers decided to split the shops as well. Other than that, Roppongi also had a bar where we learn about the Diva cult who worship demons having spread to the nearby areas of Shinjuku, Ueno, and Shibuya. It just happened that Shibuya was our next destination, so that was a useful tip. Of note, Shibuya had the famous Hachiho statue and this menacing building with an automated turret out front demanding an ID code. The 3D dungeon houses Shibuya's chapter of the Diva cult run by the demon Balan. A woman out front charges 300 Maka as a show of gratitude for the privilege of seeing him, and I accidentally pressed yes when I wanted to say no. The sluggish UI really screwed me over this time. That decision locked me inside Balan's antechamber, and my only way out was through him. Upon seeing me and my party, he immediately freaks out and attacks us. Defeating him granted us the first of the 7 pillars, which are said to hold great power when gathered together. As the Diva cult ostensibly advocates for the existence of humans and demons, the Shibuya dungeon is home to a bunch of demonic NPCs, including a zombie that tells me to try running laps around Hachiho's statue, and a familiar face. Reg has set up shop in the human world, following the same business model as in the first game. In exchange for a precious stone, he gives you one of his mysterious items, some of which can be really useful and others that are absolute garbage. Just like in the first game, you can find runes that generate infinite stones to give Reg, and once again, the amethyst spawn happens to be just a few steps away. Lastly, I run into a foppish nobleman who asks young Bael to give him a massage in exchange for the water tally. Call him creepy if you want, but at least he wasn't asking for a round of puff puff. Looking at the map, we can clearly see there's another broken bridge leading into Ginza, so it didn't take a genius to figure out that's where you're supposed to use the water tally, but first I decided to try out the zombie's advice. Shock and surprise! There's a second overworld! This is actually just a little taste of what's to come, but the idea that the developers included another map with a completely different alien landscape was a promising prospect nonetheless. The only place I could reach was a stone altar where a Naga stood in agony, impaled by a massive sword. Much to her chagrin, it turns out that we're not strong enough to release her just yet. Making a note to try again later, I went around Hachiho's statue again and teleported back to Shibuya. Ginza is the busiest area yet, starting with an underground mall type of area where you can find every kind of shop conveniently placed right beside one another. It's always nice to upgrade my characters, but this upgrade session exposed perhaps the biggest flaw in the equipment UI, the lack of transparency regarding equipment stats. The original Megami Tensei didn't present any equipment stats either, but broadly speaking, you could tell stronger items apart from the fact that they were more expensive. Unfortunately, Megami Tensei 2's increased complexity wasn't accompanied by a better interface. Many pieces of equipment give you extra stats, but the only way to know which of them are boosted and by how much is to compare them before and after equipping each item, making for a long, boring back and forth. The locals also have plenty to talk about. Rumors of a mysterious island appearing in the south, Lucifer's frozen corpse having been brought to Ginza and treated as some sort of tourist attraction, a monk asking us to defeat a basilisk who decided to nest nearby, and the cyber laboratory. Oh yeah, the spirit of science is alive and well in Ginza, and the people of the Cyber Laboratory specialize in the field of cybernetics, which, as you can easily guess, is bound to become relevant later. Exploring the rest of the Ginza dungeon, I eventually ran into the Basilisk, who was easy enough to beat, though basilisks are famed for being able to petrify people and this one didn't, so I feel like I probably got lucky there. The monk gives me some kind of item as a reward, which I couldn't translate by myself, but others seem to refer as a set of prayer beads. Moving past the basilisk, the tunnel branches off. One goes east towards Ueno and the other north towards Shinjuku, but the demons deeper in the Ginza basement were a bit too tough for me, so I took another break to strengthen my demonic allies and also paid the Naga another visit. This time she sang a different tune and allowed me to remove the sword from her body, giving me both the sword and a new level 30 Naga friend. The Naga made a huge impact on my party's combat abilities, allowing me to finally tackle Ginza properly. Further inside, I found Lucifer's frozen orbs and wow! Under those heavy ceremonial robes, he was hiding quite the athletic body. His six-pack shows even through the eyes. It felt a little weird to see him frozen though, considering my head cannon consists of Nakajima's party auto-attacking him into submission while Yumio heals everyone. Nearby, there's also the Suzuki Company headquarters. The citizens of Ginza didn't seem to like them much, but the guard at the door allowed us to enter and have a little talk with their president. You know, there was this one time I was playing GURP Suppers with my friends and I came up with the idea for Bulletman, a superhero whose only special power was to fly really fast in a straight line and crash into things. And the Suzuki president looks exactly as I pictured him. Look at his head, put some aerodynamic pauldrons on him and he becomes the perfect projectile. Anyway, he seems to be a fan of politics and eagerly tells us about the power struggle between Pazuzu in the west and Bael to the east, and how Lucifer might wake up any day now and join the fray. In fact, the way he phrases it, I think he was looking forward to that. Ticking time bombs aside, the Ginza basement linked to another set of tunnels and a Tiamat guarding the way to something. He was clearly too strong for me, so it was time for another fusion break and another round of revisiting some dangling plot threads, this time taking a look at Ueno. Ueno had a very ominous pentagram, the first Heretics manor capable of 3x fusions, and another statue which teleported us to another Demon World island where we found another sword stuck in an altar. It wasn't imprisoning another demon, but it was clearly described as suspicious. I decided to risk pulling it out and got the Cursed Sword Nihil, which I immediately equipped. I don't know what I was expecting to get out of equipping a Cursed Sword, but doing so immediately cursed my character. Luckily, the Ueno statue was right beside the Heretics Manor, so I could easily unearth myself, but that destroyed the sword. The local dungeon starts with a nice young lady asking whether or not I believe in coexisting with demons, which was more than enough to remind me that we were back in Diva territory. It led straight to the pentagram which holds Leonard's Sabbath every full moon, but the gatekeeper at the entrance would only let us enter if we proved our allegiance by showing him an inverted cross, which presented us with some difficulty on account of us not having one. Making our way back through the Ginza tunnels, we ran into a warrior woman claiming to have witnessed a girl named Hiroko being dragged towards Ikebukuro by a group of Diva cultists. Yeah, regardless of where you fall in the freedom debate, I think we can all agree that the Diva cult is full of red flags, and I say that as someone whose party is 2 dirt demons. Wait, 2 divided by 3, 66.6. God damn it. We also found the petrified corpse of a demon named Atlas, but I didn't have anything to help him with, so I just made a note of that and moved on. Hiroko's trail exits into the Kourakuen, a famous baseball stadium that was demolished in 1988 to make way for the Tokyo Dome. This is another entertainment town with all the gambling of Ariake, but none of the Mayumis. Instead, there was a guy talking about having a cybernetic arm implanted on him by the Cyber Lab people, and a very stylish guy who claims that his demon is unbeatable. Well, we wouldn't let that stand, would we? By telling him no, he immediately unleashes his single, lonely Vitara on us. Poor guy never stood a chance. Even though my party was still tired from walking all over the tunnels, we easily pummeled him into submission and got the Earth Tally by way of apology. Ikebukuro happened to be the next town over and seemed absolutely deserted. It only had a lonely, uninhabited house with a little note from the demon Asmodai, claiming to have kidnapped Izanagi and Izanami again, and that anyone wishing to save them should head for the Great Buddha in the desert. Man, the tasks really keep piling up, don't they? This is another area where Megami Tensei 2's UI fails to keep up with the game's increased complexity. While there is some charm to making my own notes, the sheer volume of random, disconnected bits of information being thrown at me really made me wish I had a quest log. and I wasn't even writing them out by hand. Anyway, my priority was to save Hiroko, presumably being held by a Diva Otis in Ikebukuro, so I entered the 3D dungeon. And that's when I met the Biwa monks. These guys are brutal. They're weak to spend an area of effect spell that does significant damage and inflicts the penny status effect, preventing your party from acting. They were literally the first enemies we encountered in the dungeon and almost wiped my party then and there. You know what? Hiroko can wait a little longer. So onwards to Shinjuku, where Pazuzu waited. Most of the Shinjuku buildings were blocked by a barrier, leaving only a single building inhabited by Checkmen. I guess Pazuzu was off limits for the moment. But finding the Checkmen was very helpful at this point since it allowed me to teleport back to Haneda and heal. I also took the opportunity to engage in the time-honored tradition of faffing around, looking for side content I would complete to make the upcoming hurdles easier to clear, like buying a Petranon from Rag to ear the petrified Atlas back in the Ginza tunnel. As expected, he was so grateful he offered to join my party. While not as strong as the Naga, he was exceptionally cheap to summon and about as strong as the other available demons, so overall, I was happy to have him. I also took the opportunity to try out the gambling minigames. There are 3 available, but I quickly found out the only worthwhile one was Big and Small, where the game rolls up a number between 0 and 9, and your job is to guess whether the next number will be between 0 and 4 or between 5 and 9. If you get it correct, you can choose to cash out or go for double or nothing up to 8 consecutive wins, netting you 51,000 Maka, and to my surprise, an ape that increases your vitality by 1. It's pure RNG, but the odds were out such that pushing for 8 wins every time more than makes up for failed attempts, so I would just keep guessing big, over and over and over again and max out my money if I wanted. Needless to say, that's very boring. So I grabbed some manga to read and went to work until I had 2 apes. Look, it might not have been strictly intended, but I guarantee you that's exactly what I would have done back in the 90s. There were a couple more places to explore in the Shinjuku surroundings. First, a cave to the north, home to Mammon, one of Bael's underlings. He promises to let us pass through if we first brought him Pazuzu's head, which, hey, fair enough, I was planning on doing it for free anyway, and granted me one of Bael's laws. Meanwhile, the Buddha statue to the northwest turned out to be yet another portal to the demon world, leading to a highly toxic swamp. We were clearly in over our heads, so I resigned myself to facing the Biwa monks once again. Thankfully, the other demons weren't so bad, so the dungeon turned out to be rather pleasant as long as we managed to run away from the monks. Plus, I soon discovered that the first floor housed a very conveniently placed healing spring. Ikebukuro was shaped like a donut, an 8x8 square with a hollow, inaccessible 4x4 middle. While exploring, we soon came across the demon Apollyon, who was holding Hiroko hostage in order to bait us into his lair. Gotta hand him some points for bravery, I guess. Ilan granted us his inverted cross and a chance to talk to Hiroko. She apologizes for Gary's behavior, as if she had any responsibility for her boyfriend's naivety, and proclaims her belief that he'll come around to his senses eventually. When that time came, we were to return the Ring of Solomon to him. Well, in my experience, close friend turned evil rivals often only turn good again when they're about to die and decide to redeem themselves through self-sacrifice, but hey, sometimes it's better to just politely nod while making vague, non-committal noises. She had just gone through a traumatic series of events and didn't need to know Gary's being as good as dead from the moment he left my party. More importantly, how did she get the ring? I thought Gary had it. Leaving Hiroko to walk all the way back to the shelter alone, despite the ever-present demonic threat, we continued to explore the Ikebukuro dungeon, which had 3 whole extra floors to clear of treasure and possible quest items. On the top floor, we met a nurse friendly to the Diva Oath and a massive demonic face engraved into a wall, holding one of the 7 pillars in its mouth. The game asks whether I wanted to grab it, and of course I said yes. Then, the face suddenly closes its mouth, crushing my character's right arm. It even became a permanent status effect and everything. The LOSARM effect will not only caused my character to lose health on every step, you know, because of the bleeding, but also made him unable to use his computer. It makes sense if you picture it as a kind of Pip-Boy attached to his arm, but neither the game nor the manual shows that being the case, and well, that definitely wasn't how Nakajima did it back in the 80s. Still, that was a serious emergency, but thankfully we already knew what to do and rushed to the cyber lab for an arm replacement. Unfortunately, since there is no such thing as public healthcare in the post-apocalypse, the Cyberlab people charged us a whopping 8,000 maka for the life-saving operation. My Witch Hat Atelier-powered gambling spree had left me with a small fortune, so I just paid for it and called it a day. But I can easily see how the constant bleeding, the inability to use the computer, the somewhat high cost of using the healing spring, and the fact that you lose half your money every time you die would compound into a very frustrating death spiral. As much as I enjoy challenging gameplay, putting players in a situation where they need a decent bit of ash to progress, but a single unlucky encounter may wipe out all their savings just feels unfair. Still, the Cyberarm came with an expanded memory module that increases the limit of stored demons from 7 to 10, so the developers at least put a price for us in the end. Now that I had a new arm, it was time for revenge, so we immediately went back to Ikebukuro's 5th floor to try again. The Arvin tried to chew my arm off just like last time, but it wouldn't break the strength and certainty of steel, netting me another pillar. Now in possession of my very own inverted cross, it was time to pay Ueno another visit. By showing it to the punk guarding the pentagram, we get to see Leonard, a Baphomet-style demon surrounded by naked women, who declares the Sabbath started by attacking my party. Leonard turned out to be yet another pushover, and defeating the old goat releases the rip on everybody else's mind, causing all the women to scatter. The ease with which Leonard folded to my party's combined might convinced me I was ready to try out the arena challenge, so I went back to the Kourakuen Coliseum and was surprised to see the Coliseum minigame works pretty much like a prototype Pokemon gym battle. You choose a demon to send out against a randomly chosen enemy demon, and they take turns attacking each other until one dies. In between rounds, I was allowed to choose a different demon to use, but I couldn't use any spells or items. The fight consisted of auto attacks only, so of course, physically oriented demons had a massive advantage. 5 consecutive wins later, I convinced the Coliseum people I was the very best like no one ever was, and got another pillar as a reward. That was the 4th one, which meant I had just passed the halfway mark on my pillar gathering efforts. The nurse in nearby Ikebukuro, released from Leonard's mind control, had a wind tally for us. Earth, flame, wind and water. You know, now that I think about it, Captain Planet wouldn't be too out of place here. Anyway, having a bunch of tallies was nice and all, but they didn't seem to have any immediate use. Truth be told, I was a bit at a loss how to proceed until I discovered Bael's law given to me by Mammon allowed me to penetrate Pazuzu's barrier and enter the Shinjuku dungeon. You know, Mammon could have told me about that. He just handed me the law and refused to elaborate, so I just forgot I even had it. The Shinjuku dungeon was the most complex yet, with a lot of fog areas and many trapdoors that cause people to drop to the lower floors. The game provided literally no hint that they are there, you know, like some subtle marks on the floor where they're supposed to open up, so the only way to learn which tiles to avoid is to literally fall through them once, mark them on your map, and double check it before taking every step. Highly frustrating to say the least. At least the first Megami Tensei had the sense to hide those traps away in optional areas, but in Megami Tensei 2? Oh no, Shinjuku is only the beginning. At the top of the Shinjuku dungeon, we meet an old friend. Gary, buddy, you've changed. Did you dye your hair? Speaking of, I love how his hair seems to be in a perpetual state of being blown by a mysterious breeze. In some ways, it feels like he's got that tryhard aura going on that I love so much. Anyway, he goes off on his spiel about saving the world, then unleashes Orthros on us. In case you are new to the series, this is a good opportunity to remind everyone demons are incapable of leveling up in the Digital Devil Story duology, which means Orthros here is still a level 18 demon with a run total of 120 health to his name. A single Ziorama from Bael was more than enough to pulverize him, and the great hero Gary just watched it happen from a safe distance, didn't even lift a finger. What a guy. In the next room, we meet Pazuzu face to face. Since Gary is likely still within earshot, he whips up the Gary is the real savior stick and attacks us. It doesn't go well for him. I mean, sure, he put up a better fight than Orthros, but not by much, and he was supposed to be powerful enough to present a threat to Bael. Honestly, if I was Bael, I'd feel insulted. One thing to note is that the game asks you whether or not you want to grab Pazuzu's head for yourself. I didn't want to risk the consequences of saying no, so I don't know what happens, but I want people to be aware of it. As much as I like player choices in games, that one is just a trap, plain and simple. Anyway, defeating Pazuzu opens up access to the Shinjuku basement, which works as another underground shopping mall, and a tunnel to Nakano, a small, unremarkable town that doesn't even have a dungeon to explore. In there, another foppish NPC provided me with the ID code to enter the intelligence building back in Shibuya. Handing over Pazuzu's head was obviously a big deal in terms of advancing the plot, so as tradition dictates, I decided to tackle the intelligence building first. Even though that man's oath allowed us to enter the intelligence building, it did not, as a matter of fact, protect us from all the turrets and robots inside. Also, a fun fact about robots: since they are machines, they have neither money nor magnetite to drop. Hell, they didn't even drop any significant amount of experience. Exploring the intelligence building was, in most ways, a complete waste of resources. But getting to the final room presented me with a computer terminal running another copy of Devil Busters, which transported us back inside the Tower of Daedalus. And the way this section is set up really surprised me. You see, the game saved everything that we had inside Devil Busters, mine and Bael's equipment, and our accumulated Maca and Magnetite. The demons transferred over, but the humans suffered an unquestionable decrease in power as a result. Bael even lost access to a couple spells because her Devil Busters equipment didn't have the same intelligence bonus her real equipment had. And just to be clear, I'm not complaining, I was genuinely impressed. The first Megami Tensei was so memory-starved they couldn't even afford to keep track of status effects for the demons stored in Ajima's computer. If you watched the previous video, you remember I abused the hell out of that fact to heal them without wasting Yumiko's MP. Now here comes Megami Tensei 2 with so much memory to spare, they can't even afford to keep track of the exact equipment we were wearing when we unsealed Pazuzu in the beginning of the game just for this occasion. It's truly amazing. Anyway, that part was a significant difficulty spike. Deprived of my gambling fortunes and maxed out magnetite reserves, I was limited in how I could use my level 30 demons and died a bunch of times as a result. Still, with some patience, I managed to survive the lower floors of Daedalus and meet a few NPCs who presented me with a puzzle. A distraught father told me one of his 4 sons was replaced by a demon. My job was to question all 4 of them and figure out which. Hobbling straight up accused Mashurin of lying, and yes, I know these names sound ridiculous, but just bear with me here. Top App claims Gargoyle is a serious, honest person. Mashurin is worried about Top App being the liar, and lastly, Gargoyle says Hobbling doesn't lie. Anyone who wanna take a guess, pause the video now. Alright, if you answered Mashurin, congratulations, you win the self-satisfaction of clearing a basic logic puzzle. If you didn't, better luck next time, I guess. Here's how you figure it out. If Hobbling was lying about Mashurin, then by extension, Gargoyle would also be lying about Hobbling. Since we know there's only one demon, that's impossible. If it's impossible for Gargoyle to be lying, we also know Hobbling is telling the truth. Pretty cool, right? Anyway, Mashurin's doppelganger runs away, but we rescue the real Mashurin, for which his father is grateful enough to open a door on the first floor. Before going through it though, I found a room inhabited by Cerberus who, let's just say he's seen better days. Generally, I'd prefer Megami Tensei 2's character designs 9 times out of 10, but in multiple ways, Cerberus here is the 1 out of 10. He's just a palette swap of Orthros. I mean, granted that was the case in the first game too, but look how old they used to be. Big, spiky and full of muscles like a cross between a lion and a dog. Meanwhile, in Megami Tensei 2, he's all emaciated and his mouth looks like it's missing a bunch of teeth. It's like this is the exact same Cerberus that accompanied Nakajima 50 years ago, suffering from old age. Still, he was level 40 now and jumped at the opportunity to join my party, so hey, why not? The door led to Nidhogg, the area boss, who looked more like a weird, twisted frog than the dragon of Norse myth. He didn't have anything to say and died rather easily, but winning the fight granted me the Devil Analyzer, a very self-explanatory tool. It keeps track of the last 5 enemies you fought and allows you to see their stats, just like when you check your allied demon stats on the pause menu. It's not particularly useful, to be honest, unless you're trying to write a guide, and the fact that you get it so late in the game limits its utility even on that front, but other than the manual, it's the most overt manifestation of the developers' attempts to make the game a little more forthcoming with information. With that said, as far as I'm concerned, Cerberus was the real prize here, and that prize gave me the confidence to wrap up another loose end. Remember a couple dozen levels ago when I got trounced by Tiamat in the tunnels? As you would expect, all these extra levels really made a difference and he folded in just 3 turns. Further along his tunnel, I met another, or maybe the same, Messiah Ultist who told me it was too early to keep going that way as the Lost Palace had not yet re-emerged. It was finally time to hand over Pazuzu's decaying head to Mammon in exchange for access to the eastern half of the map, except Mammon, in a very stupid evil move, decided to attack us. Now, as a demon, I fully expected him to not give a single F about breaking his word if he thought it would be advantageous to do so, but let's think about it for a minute. He sent us to kill Pazuzu in his place, which most likely means he couldn't do it himself, so he had us carve a path through 6 whole floors in the Shinjuku dungeon, killing dozens of Pazuzu's minions all the way into Pazuzu's inner sanctum, kill him, and return to deliver his head personally. If that wasn't proof of how strong we were, I don't know what was. Then this guy, who was, for all intents and purposes, weaker than Pazuzu, decides to attack us head-on, by himself. I nominate Mammon for a Darwin Award, but I'm not sure if demons believe in evolution. With him dead, the eastern half of the map lay open to me and my party. The first stop led to a Checkmen, always nice to see those, and then to the Buddhist temple of Nishiarai Daishi, where the monks propose a test to see if I'm the real savior. That threw me in for a loop, since I thought the whole point of being the savior was that Pazuzu came up with it to trick gullible teenagers into fighting Bael for him. I mean, I was really going to fight Bael anyway, if only because his minion tried to kill me, but my point is that I thought we were past all that savior talk. But hey, why not? The developers put a Checkmen nearby for a reason. The monks then promptly transported me and my party to a 3D dungeon for us to fight our way back out of. The monsters inside weren't particularly difficult, but the whole floor was covered in fog, so it was really easy to get lost even with a map. After finding our way out, the monks awarded us with another pillar. Further to the south, we found Bael's castle, but the bridge was blocked by a bunch of soldiers who refused to let us pass. Mora was waiting nearby, and showing her the earth tally causes her to bring us to Zaratan, which turns out to be a giant turtle that swallows us whole. The Zaratan tileset looks great in a rose, gutsy kind of way, all pink and wet. The monsters were once again really tough, which, compounded with a significant number of floor traps and the fact that there was nowhere to rest and heal, made it really difficult to explore, so I gave up on it for the moment and made a quick detour to the Buddha statue. Crossing the swamp, I found another 3D dungeon with a bunch of pushover enemies, leeches and octopusses. Ha, I remember when they used to be bosses. On the top floor of this dungeon, the boss room turns out to be empty, but a voice speaks to us. It was Izanami contacting us to say we are not yet ready to face Asmodai. Then she teleports us back to the Buddha statue in what seems to amount to a polite but firm "get out now." Well, back to the giant turtle's intestines, I guess. Zaratan turned out to be a complete waste of time and money, as the turtle's intestines held no treasure, only pain, suffering, and a guy charging half my mana for the privilege of leaving the damn turtle. doing so was actually required to advance the plot in a roundabout way. You see, the guy lands Zaratan in the beach near Bael's castle, bypassing the bridge full of soldiers. I can't help but think we would have been better off just fighting the soldiers blocking the bridge and calling it a day, but hey, the developers wanted players to explore the young or infested guts of a giant turtle, so that's what I did. Bael's castle is where the game stops pulling its punches, by the way. The first floor is welcoming enough. Sure, it has monsters, but also a healing fountain, shops, and another set of gambling dens, which I took as a sign to gamble my way back to an acceptable amount of money. Also, Mayumi is back, in case you're the kind of person who gets off on being drugged to death by a pretty girl. Just say no, kids. But once you leave that relatively safe area around the entrance, all bets are off. Bael's castle is home to werewolves capable of paralyzing you, genies who use powerful area of effect fire spells that fry your beast-type demons before you have a chance to heal them, and these floating cyclopic heads called Legbas. These ring bastards can and will cast an instant death spell if given half a chance, meaning every encounter with them risks a game over. On the flip side, you can recruit them for your team, and the friendly Legba can revive your characters just as easily. Reaching the top floor of Bael's castle, we find out Gary had been waiting for us. He doesn't quite apologize, but he does admit to being wrong, then proceeds to send his demons to attack us so he can fight Bael by himself while we're busy fighting them. Gary really is the avatar of tryhard-induced bad decisions, isn't he? Again, he wanted to kill Bael by himself, so he sends his minion to attack us. Anyway, engine and design limitations mean they come at us one at a time and are really easy, but the fight gives the game a narrative excuse to tell us that there are some horrible sounds coming from the boss room. We enter and, sure enough, find Gary contemplating his well-earned prize, and Bael standing near his soon-to-be orbs taunting us. And to be fair, that was a challenging boss fight. Despite his size, Bael was faster than everyone in my party and had an area of effect spell that hit really hard, so keeping them healed was much harder than usual, to the point Bael just couldn't keep up with him and I was forced to prioritize. This fight doesn't end with his death though. Before we can deal the finishing blow, a white smoke envelops him and turns him into a frog. Look at the little guy just standing there while we decide whether or not to squish him. No mercy for the merciless though, he was my best friend, so it's only fair I him back. Granted, Gary's defeat was so dumb it might as well have been self-inflicted, but even then, it made no sense to spare a demon lord. With the frog properly squished, Gary uses his dying moments to tell us about Bael's Orb of Lamentation, but his time runs out before he can tell us anything substantial. In a scene laden with symbolism, we take the Orb of Lamentation from Gary's hands and return Solomon's ring to him, thus fulfilling our promise to Hiroko. Through his self-sacrifice, Gary had redeemed himself, reconnected with his lover, and attained peace in a warrior's death. As for us, we had seen our best friend die right in front of us, unable to stop it, and would be burned by that grief for the rest of our journey. But never mind that, because healing Bael granted us enough experience to level up. Seriously, the emotional whiplash of having such a heavy scene immediately pivoting to the little fanfare you get every time you level up was way too funny. It instantly killed the mood. So I assigned my stat points, used my 2 healers and Legba to resurrect and heal my party back to full health, then made our way back out of the castle, leaving Gary's orbs behind instead of spending the 8 MP I would need to resurrect him. Of course, Megami Tensei 2 is far from the first or last game to have issues accidentally sabotaging emotional moments like this by having the characters and world as described by the game mechanics work differently from how they should work for the plot to make sense. But Megami Tensei's setting and tone makes this disconnect a lot more aggravating. The first game's manual even explicitly states that Lucifer had revived Low-E, Set and the other bosses as part of his plan, and he too was revived at some point after being defeated by Nakajima and Yumiko. The meaning behind death and the afterlife changes considerably in the context of a world where you have clear, undeniable proof of the existence of mythological and religious beings, not to mention resurrection. To use Dragon Ball as an example, think about how many times Goku and the others headed towards certain death under the assumption that the survivors would summon Shenron and wish them back to life. Up until that moment, the game's mechanics and storytelling seemed to agree on that point. So in that own test, not only does Gary's sacrifice feel a little cheap, like he only did that to while fully expecting his bleeding heart friend to resurrect him afterwards, it also makes our party seem heartless by refusing to do so, even though it wouldn't be a large effort on our part. By the way, a little secret about the resurrection spell. It restores the target to full HP and MP, meaning you have potentially infinite MP as long as you have 2 characters capable of using it. Anyway, just in case you lost the thread after that little rant, let's recap a bit. The game started with Bael ruling over the Tokyo Wasteland from within his castle, Pazuzu returning to Shinjuku to once again challenge him, and Lucifer frozen in the Ginza basement. And now Bael had been turned into a frog and squished, Pazuzu was turned into orbs and decapitated, and Lucifer was... yeah, about that. While wandering around directionless, trying to figure out what to do with the orb, I happened to visit the monk in Ginza, and he told me Gary had woken up Lucifer. You know, maybe leaving him to rot was the better idea after all. It was around then that I remembered the tunnel cultist talking about a lost palace and decided to pay him another visit. Bingo, he finally let us through into the heart of the nuclear crater. Boy, I sure hope that bomb had a short half-life. In the center of the crater, a circle marks the spot where we implant the 7 pillars, they fuse together to become a massive single pillar, then nothing else happens. I guess this is the part where most people who try playing Megami Tensei 2 without a guide end up stuck. As far as I can tell, there weren't any direct hints on what to do. I mean, at least I didn't run into any. But after staring at that pillar for a minute or two, I remembered how I could walk around statues to teleport to the demon world and decided to try it. Going around the pillars triggers a massive asshole to rise from the underground, not what I expected, but it worked. I wonder how frustrated someone would be if they hadn't done their due diligence by obsessively exploring every possible corner and talking to everyone they could find along the way though. The asshole turned out to be more like a orator, but you get to meet the disembodied head of Taira no Masakado, a legendary samurai from over 1,000 years ago who, among other things, revolted against the Emperor of Japan and ended up beheaded. He let us pass through to the other side, and we arrive in the demon world. For like the 4th time. Still, it's a testament to the sheer increase in project scale and development resources between the 2 games that the studio made not 1, but 2 entire overworlds for us to explore. Anyway, visiting the nearby altar allows you to learn the orb's primary purpose. These altars are spread throughout the entire map, and each orb is associated with one. As you acquire them, new destinations become available, allowing you to progress with the story. So mechanically, they work as a way of gating player access to higher level areas while preserving the open world feel. As we started with the Orb of Lamentation, our first destination was the village of Reef, which is, as expected, entirely inhabited by demons. From then, we learned that Asmodai, the demon who imprisoned the gods Izanami and Izanagi, lives in a cave to the south. With that said, this world is a much more hostile place. There's the expected bump in enemy strength, but the real danger lies in the status effects. Not only do enemies capable of instant heal attacks start appearing more often, you also have to deal with curses and paralysis. Plus, the layout of the map itself makes exploring a lot harder. There are many caves and tunnels to go through, many of which lead to dead ends. In a way, this whole world feels like the Sea of Flames did, a confusing, relentless, dangerous combat gauntlet that resists your every attempt to explore it. It contrasts with the much more amenable Tokyo Wasteland, showing the difference between a world that's been slowly taken over by demons and their wild, untamed ancestral home. The issue being that the technology at the time heavily limited the ways the developers could get that feeling across, and it manifests into being an unfair rindathon where, even if you do everything correctly, a single unlucky encounter can force you to retreat all the way back to the start to heal and try again. Just like the Sea of Flames. To the south, I found Sadness Village, where a sexy vampire runs the female armor shop, and a helpful zombie talks about a hydra guarding the Orb of the Tides deep inside the cave. But there's a catch, only the water spirit Undyne can grab it. Usually you can figure out where the boss room is by just paying attention to the map layout. I often found them to consist of a main corridor leading to the boss, surrounded by a bunch of side paths that branch off into treasure and dead ends, and though there's some variety this time, dungeons are still largely comprised of 8x8 blocks, so when you find one corner of any given area, chances are you already know its exact shape. This time I was out completely unaware. I thought I was about to enter yet another corridor when suddenly, boom, surprise Hydra attack. Hydras aren't difficult to fight at that point in the game, but I was spent and didn't have much in the way of healing left. I survived, but just barely. After the fight, the Undying pipes up, claiming that the water was calling out to her. She dives in and the game gives us another of these false choices. She's taking a long time, should we leave her behind? Obviously, since we know the orb is in there, the answer is no. We wait patiently until she returns and hands it over to me. Objective complete. We still had unfinished business in the region though. From the moment you step into Asmodee's cave, you just know it belongs to him. I mean, all Valley of Laments caves up to this point were blue and had this fleshy texture that looks just like Zaratan's innards. Meanwhile, Asmodee seems to be the only demon around who can afford to live in a cave made out of actual stone. The enemies inside are mostly new and in general more humanoid. Ironically, this caused the dungeon to be a lot easier since they didn't inflict anywhere near as many status effects as the previous enemy set. So we quickly reached Asmodee, who as usual spent his allotted screen time taunting us, then died a lot more easily than the Hydra. I guess it just goes to show how important preparation can be. Behind him, we meet Izanagi, who thanks us for the help, but is sorry to say our Izanami is in another asshole. He then leaves, promising to watch over us. Yeah, just like last time, I'm sure. Can't you do a little less watching and a lot more fighting maybe? Hell, can't you just get in the computer like everybody else? Healing Asmodee also awards us the Orb of Madness, so you know what that means. Time to go explore another altar or two. The altar reveals that not all orbs are the same, as the Orb of the Tides didn't unlock any locations. The Orb of Madness did though, bringing us to the Plains of Madness, which seems to be perpetually on fire for some reason. Anyway, after we stopped to buy sci-fi guns from a skeleton at the nearby Village of Madness, I ran into a slight problem. The way to the next castle was completely blocked by flames. There was literally no way around them. It took some experimentation and a fair few random encounters until I discovered that walking into this one specific spot triggered a cutscene where the game asked me if I wanted to use an item. Again, as far as I can tell, there were no hints about this whatsoever. The developers just felt like putting this obstacle in my way, filling the place with strong random encounters every 1 to 3 steps, and expected me to smash my face against a literal firewall over and over until I found the one single spot that allowed me to progress. And then I have to pick which specific item from my whole inventory I should use to open the way forward. I mean, at least now there was some logic to the fact that you can use water to extinguish fires, so I did the obvious and used the Orb of Tides, which was in fact the solution. And we enter Belial's castle. That castle has a very nostalgic shape. The first floor is comprised of a wide open area full of little one-square rooms on each side, kinda like Mazura's 6th floor. It's also home to some old friends from the first game. Incidentally, have you ever been flashed by a succubus before? You're welcome. Seriously though, this place is succubus central. They just keep coming after you more often than any other encounter. At least they don't hit as hard as in the first game, but they inflict paralysis, which isn't that much of an issue until it very suddenly becomes one. But the real star of the show here is Seth. Demoted from his position as an area boss, he prowls the house of Belial's castle as a glorified experienced piñata. At this point in the game, killing him twice was more than enough for a level up. The only issue being that he only appears very rarely, so chances are you're going to run into multiple succubi parties before fighting a single set. Also, he petrified half of my party once. Just once though. It was also around that time that I started experimenting with 3x fusions, a special, somewhat convoluted expansion to the fusion system that only allows good aligned demons as ingredients. The manual states that fusing 3 spirits results in messengers, that is, angels, who are really interesting since they have access to samurai arm, which, contrary to normal arm, always succeeds. From what I understand, each messenger can be acquired from a specific combination of spirits. I stopped trying once I got Michael since he is level 52 and that happened to be very close to my level at the time, but I also discovered Uriel, Gabriel and Raphael. Exploring Belial's castle is a very slow process. None of the monsters were truly dangerous, but every Succubus encounter guaranteed I'd end up with at least one paralyzed character, and only Bael would heal them. The issue here being that each casting of Paraladi cost 6 MP, so assuming she didn't use any other spells, we had only about 12 charges before being forced to retreat to the Madness Village healing spring. Just like Izanagi had told us, Izanami was being held prisoner in Belial's dungeon, guarded by the Greek bronzeman Talos. She refused to be rescued though, claiming to be dead and her body rotted beyond recovery. Her wish was to be left alone so that no one saw her sorry state. Maybe she remembers how Nakajima reacted to it that one time she kept showing up in his dreams. But as much as I complained about the game not giving me any hints on how to get to Belial's castle, at least one of the NPCs in Madness Village made it very clear that to revive a dead god, I should find the Hangon-O, which Google helpfully told me is a mythical incense capable of summoning dead spirits. They even told me exactly where to find it, in Mora's shrine. That was for later though. First I had a Belial to heal and, more likely than not, another orb to pry from his not old yet but definitely dead hands. He turned out to be another pushover, so we just grabbed the Orb of Wrath and moved on to the next area, the Wrathlands. We meet our good friend Mora, who claims to have come to visit because she heard there was some tasty food to be found there, and indeed there was. The Village of Wrath is home to a restaurant, run by a zombie. Again, I try not to judge people by their appearance, but I'm not sure I support the idea of a zombie working in food service. Only when the zombie handed me a menu did I realize Mora never told me what she wanted to eat. Once more, we ran into a situation where the game simply did not give me any hint that I could use to arrive at the correct answer. At least I wasn't limited to just picking one meal at a time, so I just used my obscene amounts of money to buy one of each. In the Village of Wrath, we also learned that gnomes are somehow connected to the Gates of Wrath, and a purple wrench-like monster asked for our help rescuing his children, held hostage in Mora's shrine. You know, this kind of applies to every area up to now, but it really feels like the Wrath Village isn't anywhere near as wrathful as the name would lead you to believe. In fact, the people in those villages seem just as troubled by the roving bands of hostile demons outside as the humans back in Tokyo. Anyway, by delivering Mora's food, she helps us cross over to the western bank of that weird demon river where, helped by a summoned gnome, we went past the Gates of Wrath. By the way, here's a little warning. You need a gnome every time you wanna enter those gates, so you shouldn't get rid of him until you're 100% done with this dungeon. Inside the gate, we were met with another pink, slimy guts level. The wonders of the demon world never cease to amaze me. Then, in literally the first encounter, this bastard manages to paralyze Bael. But this time, I had prepared myself. As I was fusing demons, I noticed one of the possible results, the Huri, had the Paraladi spell, and that made all the difference. I mean, otherwise I'd be forced to walk all the way back to the village and try again. In that cave, I also met some sort of Magnetite selling goblin. He seems to be a random encounter, but instead of fighting, he offers to sell you Magnetite at what seems to be a random price. To add even more randomness to the process, he doesn't just hand it over to you either. You have to choose one of 3 bags with varying amounts of Magnetite on them. Having the Huri as a backup the Paralyzer and the Archangel Michael as a mobile reviving station completely negated the challenge of this dungeon, and we soon found this area's mini-boss, the Echidna. Alright, sorry, the other Idna, known by the Riz as the mother of all monsters, though I have to say the Megami Tensei representation doesn't really do her justice. That's just a worm-turned Super Saiyan. She is easily dealt with, and we move on to the second half of the dungeon, which, while still not very dangerous, was home to a teleporter puzzle. I hate teleporter puzzles. They are a nightmare to map. Still, we managed to get through it relatively unaided, which led straight into the next dungeon, Mora's Shrine. Having to go through 2 dungeons in a row without any rest was a bit of a problem, but at least the monsters of Mora's Shrine didn't really inflict any dangerous status effects. The main issue with the place is that it was booby-trapped to hell and back. Nevertheless, we eventually find the Hangon of the fairy children, then Mora himself. By this point, you already know how this goes. We enter the boss room, he spits out a line about how he's going to knock us all down or something, then we fight and he dies in 4 to 5 turns. Really, getting to the bosses has been more challenging than actually fighting them for a while now. Defeating Mora nets us the Lost Orb, a fitting name for the orb owned by someone who has a goddamn teleport maze on his front porch. Unwilling to go through that particular circle of hell again, we just teleport back to the village of Wrath to talk with the purple demon from before. As a reward for freeing the children, he gives us the key to Belphegor's tower, promising that we would find a lot of treasure there. His idea of a reward is giving me the means to burgle somebody else's home. Well, when in the demon world, Belphegor's tower was just south of Wrath Village, featured the same set of monsters as the Wrath Gate, and really had a bunch of treasure. Any way I could see it, it really felt like a bonus level where the game lays off the challenge a bit so we can feel powerful for a while. Except Belphegor was, in fact, inhabiting Belphegor's tower. You know, I didn't feel so bad killing the demons on the way up there, but invading some random demon's home to steal his stuff and then murder him just feels weird. I mean, I mostly had good reasons for going after all the others, especially Asmodai, Belial and Moloch, but Belphegor? The guy was just hanging out in his tower, minding his own business. As a reward for defeating him, we got a new sword, the Vajra. With the Hangon O in hand, we took a quick trip back to Belial's castle and used it to restore Izanami's body and soul. She emerges from her prison in full ceremonial regalia and, like Izanagi, promises to watch over our journey. I now had 2 new altars to visit. The distant island altar turned out to be the one located right on top of the Buddha statue's tower, and the Lost Forest altar brought us to a frozen wasteland. And it was full of succubi. Again. They weren't really any danger at that point, but I found it funny that they seem to be just about everywhere in the demon world. The Lost Forest is also home to Mephistos, which you can recruit by the way, and their design is the perfect mix of creepy and goofy. Really, he seems so lanky and awkward from a safe distance, but you just know we don't want to get anywhere near him. This area is very similar to the Valley of Laments in that it's full of roundabout paths and caves to explore. Of note, I found a knight trapped inside a crystal and another far-off tower, but the most amazing aspect of the Lost Forest is the approach to the local settlement, Sleepy Village. Ice gives way to a beautiful flower field and Astar's castle off in a nearby islet. A rather cute villager warns us about the castle, while another tells us about the legend of the Sword Knight, who's supposedly so strong as to cause women to fall in love with him at first sight. And yeah, I know how that sounds, but let's not forget demons have their own culture, alright? We literally just went through a similar situation with Belphegor. That was a very clear hint though. To free the trapped knight, I'd have to get a woman to do it. Obviously not Bael, since she saw him already and didn't really seem to care. Twice already, we had used spirits to interact with the demon world's puzzles. First the Undine for the Orb of the Tides, then the Gnome for the Gates of Wrath. So, out of all the spirits I knew, which one seemed to be female? The Undine, of course, but also the Sylph. So I just fused up both of them and brought them in front of the knight. Bingo! Upon entering the room with Sylph in my party, she asks for permission to release the trapped knight. Afterwards, she asks to be fused with him. Is that the demonic equivalent of marriage, like the ultimate expression of wanting to be with someone forever? Have I been unknowingly leading around a bunch of demonic polycules all this time? Anyway, moving swiftly on, the Sword Knight explains that he was sealed by Astaroth for opposing him and wishes to join us in gratitude to Sylph. As is usual to these rescued demons, he was really strong compared to my current level, so of course I accepted. By the way, I tried fusing the two of them in the hopes of maybe getting some secret demon, but turns out they become a level 27 Erubian. On the one hand, I think that might be the only way to get a messenger outside of 3x fusions, but on the other, I'd much rather keep my level 60 Sword Knight, thanks. Then I happened to stray too close to Astaroth's castle and got interrupted by a cutscene. As we walked through the flower fields, we started feeling more and more tired until falling asleep on the spot. Then when we wake up, Bael is gone, and right in front of us, the most exuberant example of manliness I've ever seen. Astaroth, in the flesh, literally like in the buff, riding a massive green snake. And he seems so jolly, he literally goes ho 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 ho. He taunts us for a bit, then flies back to his castle. And I just can't stop thinking what an entrance that was. Yeah, at first glance he seems a bit one-dimensional, but he was just overflowing with personality, from his character design to the way he talks and acts, and even the scenery. I mean, think about it, his domain is filled with flowers as far as the eye can see. It is, without a doubt, the most outwardly beautiful region of the demon world. Just like he's far, far more beautiful than any of the sorry, misshapen sets of flesh we've been fighting up to now. And yet, all that beauty is just a veneer meant to lure hapless passerby into a false sense of security and leave them vulnerable to the many dangers hiding within. How can I look at that scenery and not see it as an extension of Astaroth's own character design? Anyway, losing my primary spellcaster was a huge blow to my party, and I wasn't ready to challenge Astaroth anyway, so I immediately reloaded my save. Look, if the developers didn't want people's saves coming out of that event, they wouldn't have put a Checkmen literally 5 steps away from it. One of the A's had a teleport puzzle, a bunch of single square rooms where almost every room held a teleport linked to another in the opposite side, and every corridor intersection held one of those tiles that spins you around. As much as I hate teleporting in those sorts of games, this one actually had a pattern to figure out, so it was interesting rather than frustrating, and noticing all the little hints that give the pattern away made for a very rewarding experience. The tower up on the north, on the other hand, was an absolute nightmare, full of difficult, powerful enemies with instant death spells, incurable status effects, and the ability to reflect melee damage, far away from any source of healing, and absolutely littered with floor traps. Clearing it wouldn't be so bad, but the encounter rate around Sleepy Village is just so high, and the flower demons that inhabit the area are such a pain to deal with. Having to walk all the way back to the tower after healing often took longer than actually exploring it. I mean, seriously, the one time I counted, I ran into 7 demon encounters before even getting to the first cave. Still, we persevered and eventually reached Mitra, who actually had some insightful comments for once. Instead of taunting us, she remarks how a woman persuaded me to betray Pazuzu, much like Eve persuaded Adam. I don't know if I would put Pazuzu on par with God, but hey, you would say he made me and Bael, in the sense that we wouldn't have our powers without him, so I wonder who the snake in that metaphor would be. Anyway, just because Mithras is slightly smarter than every other boss I faced so far, doesn't mean she didn't fall just as easily in combat. We fought, she died, and we got Lucifer's armor for our troubles. With that ordeal over, there was nothing else to do other than ready a backup healer, then head back towards Astaroth's castle, fall asleep, and once again watch the world's jolliest demon laugh his way back home. Something interesting to note, technically the party limit isn't 6 party members, but rather 2 humans and 4 demons, which is to say, I tried to summon a 5th demon to fill in for Bael, but the game wouldn't let me. Still, since the village was so close by, exploring the castle was actually a much more pleasant experience compared to Mitra's tower, even though it heavily featured Medusas who, as you would expect, really enjoy petrifying people. This area also introduced a new mechanic, sadly never used again in this game. Occasionally, a dialogue window would interrupt my exploration to describe how my party heard some sounds nearby. Some of these sounds would lead towards treasure and others towards traps. It didn't happen often enough for me to notice if there was a pattern to it, but it was an interesting bit of atmosphere. And at the top of the castle, there he was, naked, young, immensely marvelous, holding Bael hostage just for the sheer twisted joy of it. Unlike his introductory scene, Astor's boss fight was a very unremarkable affair that doesn't merit talking about in any detail. Suffice to say we won, rescued Bael, and earned the Orb of Fear for our troubles. That was a really unfortunate ending to my favorite character of this game, but it is what it is. And with that, our business in the Lost Forest was over. We moved on to Dread Mountain, the entrance to which was guarded by the gates of the Dark World. The enemies inside were dreadful indeed. Dread Mountain housed the exact same set of enemies as Mistress Tower, but this time the developers put an entire village inside the dungeon, making the act of going back to heal my party infinitely easier. Fly Village is a very literal place, populated almost entirely by fly demons. Gee, I wonder which demon's domain I just entered. One of the fly demons just straight up tells us about their lord Beelzebub. The other fly demon, meanwhile, was so hungry he confused my party with the demonic equivalent of Uber Eats. I'm not entirely sure what happened there, but by his reaction, I think he was supposed to send me on a quest to grab some takeout in Rat Village. Since I had bought one of every meal already, I just happened to have what he wanted in my inventory, so I ended up skipping the initial dialogue. As payment, he gave us some sort of stone. The way to Beelzebub was actually kinda tricky. At some point we left the mountain dungeon into the overworld, except everything was dark and we only had 2 ring spots to orient ourselves. Beelzebub was a demon of few words, and not very strong either. He folded just like everybody else and we got Lucifer's sword for our troubles. The stone given to us back in the Fly Village starts acting up and turns into a magical ring which we knew would guide us towards Lucifer's temple. Except it wasn't very clear how. Beelzebub didn't have any new orbs for me and none of my notes had instructions on what to do with the ring once we had it, so I had no choice but to wander around a bit and check if any of the NPC dialogue had changed. I eventually remembered I hadn't visited the Isa's place back at the Buddha statue ever since I rescued them, and decided to check if maybe that's what the developers expected me to do, and yep, that was it. As soon as we get to Izanami's room, the ring glows and she transports us to Lucifer's shrine. She takes the 5 orbs, Wrath, Madness, Wrath, Lost and Tides, and turns them into Hope. Anyway, the Orb of Hope transports us to Lucifer's palace, further breaking down the established metaphor since that would imply the place is like the Palace of Hope or something, and we pass a point of no return into the last stretch of the game. And Lucifer's palace is yellow. Look, I have no idea why I was so disappointed when I found that out, but I mean, there's a bunch of colors I would associate with the Prince of Hell. Purple for royalty, red for blood, fire and anger, brown for a rustic underground look, or even gray for a classic stone dungeon design. Yellow just reminds me of McDonald's. One thing that I really like though is how the palace design is an abbreviated callback to the first Megami Tensei's Infini Palace. The first floor is comprised of this array of little 2x2 rooms set in regular intervals with orders crisscrossing between them. The upper floor is narrow into a small tower and then, right before reaching his throne room, you have to go through a fog maze that I like to imagine is his personal steam bath. I was a bit tired of exploring dungeons as the enemies kept piling on every 3 to 5 steps and I was in constant danger of being afflicted by that I had no way of healing, so I wasn't as true in my mapping efforts as I usually am. I mean, when we met Lucifer, my main character had even been empiggified, and I think the threat of being forced to fight Lucifer with a porcine party was reason enough to rush through before that happened. By the way, fun fact, I don't know if it's because my main character was now a pig, or if that's just how Lucifer's throne room works. All I know is that I couldn't use my computer to summon demons before fighting him, but during the fight, the computer works just fine. He goes through the usual final boss spiel of being impressed we had gotten this far, claiming that he was going to crush us himself, then dying like all the others. A bit disappointing for a final boss, to be honest. Except he wasn't the final boss. Turns out Lucifer and Satan are two different beings, and in his final breath, he tells us to go after Satan too. We are then transported back to the Altar Island, but the altars don't work since we don't have the orbs anymore. Our only way forward was through Taira no Masahado's castle. The old samurai just repeated what he said before though. Maybe getting stuck as a disembodied head for over 1,000 years had a bit of an impact on the poor guy's sanity. The obvious way forward was through the tunnels all the way back to Ginza, but once there we were left directionless. I mean, sure we had to fight Satan, but where? All I knew was that he was somewhere in Tokyo. If the developers wanted me to stay in the demon world, they wouldn't have disabled the altars and put my party right in front of the exit. I couldn't help but feel like there was something missing there. Still, there was nothing for it. I had to find Satan somewhere in Tokyo, and Ginza was just as good a place to start as any. Eventually, we reached the Suzuki company, only instead of leading us to talk to Mr. Suzuki, the guard moves us to a new dungeon area. Eventually, we run into a little room with another talking disembodied head who tells us that the company boss is actually Satan himself. After defeating an Azura guarding the exit, we find ourselves back in front of the Suzuki company entrance. It was time to get back to Mr. Satan. Except the guard knows that we know, and before we know it, transforms into a demon and attacks us. Belphegor, buddy, I didn't expect to see you here, on account of having killed you in your own home about a dozen hours ago. I can just imagine Bel instinctively hiding the sword which stole from Belphegor's orbs while I tried to distract him. It would have been amazing if the game took that into account. He wasn't any stronger than before, while we had gained like 10 levels since then, so it barely counted as a fight. We then meet the chief, who apologizes for his guard's behavior and offers us a drink. I knew I shouldn't. I mean, for one, I'm pretty sure the main character is underage, but I just had to know what would happen. So we have a little toast, then the chief offers us another drink. Sure, when in hell, may as well embrace the devil. Except this time he hands over a poison drink as if poison held any danger to an endgame party, but that seeking out playtime was over. He transforms into this magnificent two-faced four-handed snake demon and the fight starts. Fighting Satan was an actually challenging ordeal, though not due to any extra depth. Rather, it was all due to him spamming Mudo Hanma, the strongest of the Mudo spells, that can instantly heal multiple enemies per casting, so it turned out to be less of a battle of attrition where I would auto-attack the boss and only stop for the occasional healing spell, and instead became a mad sprint where I kept trying to do as much damage as possible before running out of party members. It wasn't a bad experience, but it highlighted the continued issue of making a JRPG and game fights challenging without just pumping the damage and health numbers to ludicrous degrees, and unfortunately, Megami Tensei 2's combat system was still too simple to provide the proper framework for that. Still, Satan's character design was pretty cool. In fact, it has more in common with the first Lucifer design than Lucifer himself, and I wonder if that was intentional. Anyway, we win, and as he lay dying, Satan leaves us with one final threat. Demons will never disappear. No matter how long it takes, they'll always come back for more. Then God himself suddenly shows up to reveal his grand design and our part in it. By fighting our way through the depths of hell and back, we had proven worthy of being counted as his chosen ones and accepted into his heavenly kingdom. The old world, overrun by evil, disappears along with all of its inhabitants, and Megami Tensei 2 leaves us with a small peek at this so-called kingdom and one last question. Are we to become gods? Cut to credits, and just like last time, we watch a brief montage of some of the most important characters and scenes we saw on our journey. When it's Gary's turn, it just cuts back to his corpse lying face down in Bael's room and the subtitle "Friend Dead." I don't know why, but I thought that was way too funny. Rest in peace, Gary. Your tryhard ways were too nonsensical for this world, but I'll treasure the fleeting memories of your suicide by demon for the rest of my life. Then we reach the end screen, but our journey isn't over yet. Like last time, I took the opportunity to check my retro achievements progress and see what I missed. Well, for starters, I missed the Agutsuchi sword, which seems to appear on the Saigo statue's altar if you take the Nihil sword and go back there after defeating Lucifer. But more importantly, and this is something that might get me yelled at in the comments, only then did I learn that Megami Tensei 2 has two different endings, and I screwed up my chances of getting the secret ending fairly early by switching Bael after he became a frog. Well, something to look forward to when we get to the remakes at least. Still, staring at the end screen, my opinion on Megami Tensei 2 is a lot more conflicted than I thought it would be. I was left with a positive impression of the first Megami Tensei, but mostly because I recognized its pivotal role in building the initial series framework, setting the tone and direction that eventually blossomed out into Shin Megami Tensei as we know it. Going into Megami Tensei 2, I expected the developers to fill out the lackluster areas of that framework, and to their credit they did. But almost every improvement was plagued by a drawback. The sequel looks and sounds better, but feels worse to play. It adds some very welcome depth and complexity to the game mechanics, but fails to account for it in the user interface. It features dozens of dungeons, but only 2 or 3 are anywhere near as complex as the developers' areas. It tries to tell an actual story, but relies heavily on disposable, one-dimensional characters and offers very little context for their actions. And it leans even more heavily into the old design tree of artificially inflating the difficulty on the back half by swarming the player with monsters. Worse, not content with turning the game into a slog, the designers double down by giving a bunch of enemies the ability to instantly heal you or curse you with status ailments that can only be healed back in town. Mind you, this difficulty was already present in the first game, but not nearly as much. To put it simply, the game sits in that awkward middle ground where it outgrew the first game's minimalistic charm but couldn't manage to deal with the growing pains. It may be better developed, but Megami Tensei 1 is less flawed, so if you ask me which I would rather replay, I'd probably pick Megami Tensei 1. But let me be clear, I'm not implying the developers somehow screwed up making the sequel. These people, along with every other developer at the time, were trailblazers working on a new medium, using primitive tools and hardware without the benefit of decades of accumulated knowledge to base their decisions on, and playing the fruits of their labor, even the ones that didn't turn out perfect, is for me the joy of retro gaming. It's not about nostalgia, it's about finding new experiences in old ideas, from a time when game development was nimbler and far more experimental, and projects were under a far less pressure to sand off their edges and present a friendly, marketable face that appeals to the wider public. From that point of view, even if Megami Tensei 2's flaws were more aggravating than I expected, I'm still happy that I played it, and especially happy for meeting Astaroth. Nevertheless, I have to admit that I'm glad we're leaving the 8-bit era behind. This game pushed the Famicom to its limits, and I don't think there was much room for improvement without the benefit of a hardware upgrade. Thankfully, Nintendo released the Super Famicom on November 1990, just 7 months after the release of Megami Tensei 2, and Atlus jumped at the opportunity, releasing Shin Megami Tensei exclusively for the new console on October 1992. But that's a topic for another video. Devil knows this one has gone on for far too long already. If you've somehow made it this far, I thank you for watching, hope you've enjoyed the video, and of course, appreciate any feedback you may have. Bye bye!